This video contains complete spoilers for Plague Tale Innocence and Requiem. Please click away immediately if you're not okay with spoilers. Games can evoke a wide range of emotions, from fear and disgust to feelings of beauty and love. Some games, such as Plague Tale Requiem, focus primarily on the emotional journey. We play these sort of games because we want to feel something, to be moved in some capacity. That is the point of these games. What interests me, and the point of this video, is to explore how these emotions are crafted, how the game is designed in order to create an emotional journey. Plague Tale Requiem is a great game to use as an example because it gets the fundamentals right. At the same time, it does not excel at anything either. The game likely has things that works for you and things that do not work. The thing about emotion is that they are, of course, subjective. Your experience will be unique and different from mine. These types of emotionally driven games are often hit and miss. They are often incredible experiences or completely forgettable ones. Emotions are created by combining audio, visuals, narrative and gameplay elements. I want to showcase how these components are combined in a few scenes before I delve into each individual component. The first scene I want to discuss evokes positive emotions. Lucas is pretending to be the evil sorcerer and is hunting Amicia and Hugo. The foundation of this scene is the wholesome story of children playing hide and seek. It introduces us to the characters and the bond between them, and it allows us to connect with the characters and their joy. The player is engaged in hide and seek through gameplay. You take on the role of Amicia, which allows you to connect to her at a deeper level. It is easier to feel her emotions when you see the world through her eyes. Gameplay is not super exciting by itself, but it supports the narrative, the visuals and the audio elements really well. The visuals and audio creates a wonderful environment and a relaxing atmosphere. These elements produce raw emotions. The emotions are created through our eyes and ears directly. We don't think or do anything, we just feel immediately. When Lucas spots you, the game plays a sound cue. This is obviously really nice for the sake of communicating gameplay. But what it also does is change the atmosphere. It adds a bit of tension to the moment. The game is quite good at utilizing sound effects and music to evoke emotions. In this scene, the story, the gameplay and the visuals and audio all work together to produce positive emotions in the player. Most scenes in the game usually have a much more tense and disgusting atmosphere though. The disgusting waves of millions of rats are one of the most defining features of these games. The game becomes tense because you as a player has to run away from this wave of death and disgust. When Amicia runs for her life through the streets, failure is an option. You can get caught, which is why it becomes tense as an experience. The visuals really sell the disgusting and horrifying images of an apocalypse through rats as they burst forth from every crevice and consume the city. The music is tense, and the dying screams of people eaten alive is haunting. The narrative can be disturbing if you stop and consider what is actually happening. How an entire city and its inhabitants are being eaten alive by a tsunami of rats. But empathy for Amicia and her desperation to get back to Hugo is perhaps even more likely to evoke emotions in you. In this example, the gameplay, visuals, audio and narrative elements all produce some sort of negative emotion or tense emotion. But they don't necessarily produce the same emotion or at the same time. Sometimes an element dominates a scene or a moment. It might be the visuals, the audio, the gameplay or the narrative. In the case of cutscenes, that dominating element is by far the narrative. The gameplay is completely absent, the visuals and audio mostly serve as a supporting element to create the correct setting and the atmosphere. In this cutscene, Amicia gets very upset to learn that the adults think Hugo is condemned. We can empathize with Amicia and feel her pain. And let me play you a short clip to showcase the excellent voice acting and pay attention to how you respond to it on an emotional level. I'm sorry about the choppy footage. The main point is the voice acting, so close your eyes if the footage bothers you.
I don't give a damn about your order! I don't know you, I don't work for you! Let me see him!
Hugo is tired, Amicia. You can't enter his room in your state.
Let me pass!
Not until you've calmed down. You said it yourself.
It is easy to see why Amicia is upset. Her mother and the expert on Hugo's sickness have given up on him. It is easy to empathize with her. Good writing and good voice acting helps a lot. You can feel the anger in her voice. The story and especially the characters can be quite effective in creating an emotional response in the player. I hope that these examples manages to showcase how the game combines the different elements to create cohesive scenes in order to evoke emotions. Sometimes with a focus on a single element or several of them. Let's go through these elements in more detail. Visual and audio elements have a massive potential to evoke raw emotions. By that I mean emotions that appear out of nowhere, purely based on sensory input. You don't think, you just feel. Images go into your eyes and emotions come out. Sound goes into your ears and emotions come out. Emotions appear purely based on your senses and nothing else. The beautiful island landscape is for example idyllic. It evokes positive emotions such as a sense of beauty, of well-being and of relaxation. The wide ocean, the flying kites, the flower fields, the serene windmills. These visual elements are important in crafting the atmosphere and the overall vibe of the island, and therefore the emotional response. The sound design enhances these emotions, from the sound of chirping birds, grasshoppers and the wind to the calm and gentle music. The game can be really beautiful and relaxing when it wants to, but most of the time it is not. Most of the time it is disgusting, horrifying and tense. Amicia has to wade through putrid water filled with corpses and flies to fix a mechanism. The visuals of corpses floating in putrid water looks disgusting and horrifying. The subtle music adds a somber atmosphere to the scene. The crows of ravens are symbolic of death as well. The grunts and strain in Amicia's voice highlights how bad this is for her.
Please, forgive me.
The game has a lot of horrifying and disgusting scenes like this. When working with disgusting visuals, graphical fidelity is important. The more realistic the better it is. But in general, both the visual and audio direction is good in the game. The presentation is solid as the final product.
I'm getting the ferry to you.
When both visuals and audio elements are mixed together into the final product like this, it can be hard to tell the difference between the visual element and the audio elements in terms of impact. To highlight those differences, I want to play a couple of clips. One clip where I remove the visuals and one where I remove the audio. I will play the same clips back with both visuals and audio together to highlight how visuals add to the audio or how audio adds to the visuals. I'm going to start by playing a clip without any visuals at a normal volume without me talking over it, and pay attention to the emotions evoked by the sound and the music.
What is that? They're here. Don't drop the torch. What is that? They're here. Don't drop the torch.
I hope that this scene highlighted how important sound is in isolation, but also how important visual elements are in supporting that sound. The scene gets a lot better with visuals, but the sound by itself is haunting. The same thing happens with the visuals. If you remove the sound, the visuals still carry a lot of emotions, but it gets a lot better when you add good sound to it. I will mute the sound of the clip shortly. When the clip is completed, I will replay the clip with sound. The visuals are probably the most important part of this scene. but the sound adds a lot to it as well. Both visuals and audio elements can be very powerful in evoking emotions, alone or in combination. The visuals and audio can be the main source of emotions, or they may support the gameplay or the narrative to evoke emotions. Environmental storytelling is a great example of this, where storytelling is done through visual and audio elements. You get the picture though, so let's move on to the next element. A story has the potential to evoke incredibly strong emotions if it is done well, but it has to be done well. A bad or mediocre story will reduce the player's emotional investment into the game. That makes it harder to connect to the game emotionally and its world and its characters. That is catastrophic in these types of games. Stories should be done well if they're included and skipped if the developer can't create good stories. The narrative of Plague Tale Requiem is pretty solid when it is focused on the characters of Hugo and Amicia, but I think it is pretty mediocre when it is focused on the overarching plot or world story. Empathy is one of the core drivers of the emotions in this game. When you are focused on the characters, empathy does a lot of work for you. The narrative of Plague Tale Requiem takes place during the Middle Ages in an alternative version of France during a plague. The plague is carried by rats that turn entire cities into rubble. Humans can't empathize with the death at this scale. It is too much for our emotions to take in and understand. While the game can't use empathy to produce emotions here, it can use logic and thought to produce them. You can logically consider the consequences of an entire city being destroyed. You can understand what just happened, how so many people died, how many children are left without parents. Then you might begin to wonder and consider what happens next for the survivors. How will the children live and grow up alone? When you thought a bit about what just happened and consequences of that, you may begin to feel uncomfortable or horrified. Emotions are produced through logic and not empathy, but that still works for the game. These emotions hit us harder once you make the connection to the real world. Once you realize that this world is basically a portrayal of the Black Death in Europe. With the exception of the magical rats, of course. The horror of what you see in the game is in a lot of ways something that actually happened to real people that lived in the past. And that can be quite unnerving and emotional to consider. You may begin to think and ask questions. What if you lived during the Black Death? How would you feel like going through a plague like that? To reinforce the thread of history, the game actually highlights a lot of history. The example in the background showcases the Roman arenas of the past. We see the bones of wild animals that died fighting in these locations. The Romans really did build a lot of arenas in France and transported exotic wild animals to fight in them. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire is around 700 years prior to this story, which is again around 700 years prior to our own time. The point of this historical thread is to remind the player that while history can seem ancient and distant, it is still real. History contains real events and real people. While the world and history is a nice part of the story, the most important role it serves in this game is to serve as a foundation for the characters. Characters are, after all, the main point of the story, specifically Amicia and Hugo and their bond. Hugo is the carrier of the Immacula, the source of the plague. He is sick and all he wants to be is a normal boy and live a normal life. He wants what he has at the start of the story, where everything is normal and wholesome. Amicia wants to protect and care for him. She wants him to be happy and to be healthy. Obviously that does not happen, because this is not that type of story. The plot forces Amicia and Hugo into a ton of shit, and a lot of situations where they have to kill hordes of people to survive. They want to protect each other and are willing to go to pretty extreme lengths to achieve that. This is a very typical sister-brother story, and it is quite simple, but it works. We understand that Amicia wants to protect Hugo, and we understand Hugo's desire to be normal. They behave as real human beings that have to deal with a ton of horrible situations. In short, the characters are really well written. They are complex and with depth. The voice acting that supports this solid writing makes it easier to connect to the characters as well. The third scene I began the video with showcases how great the voice acting can be, especially for Amicia. That being said, I don't think the plot is particularly good. It works for the purpose of forcing the characters to deal with terrible shit. My problem with the plot is that I feel like it tries to force itself into the real world instead of staying in an alternative reality. An alternative reality where the magical rats are real and are the source of every plague. When the focus is on the macula, I begin to question where the macula comes from, which sort of eviscerates the world building for me. There's no real source for the macula as far as I can tell, it's just magic that appears. When the world building collapses, the characters lose most of their edge for me. This plot complaint is pretty subjective, and I think the plot works if you don't need great world building. I do need great world building though, which is why it does not work for me. The important part of this is the consequence this has for my emotional response, which is to say that I feel nothing after this world building collapses. The story and its characters do nothing for me at this point, and that leaves visuals, sound and gameplay to carry the entire experience. While sound and visuals are pretty good, they're not that good. The gameplay serves a supporting role, and when the core aspects of the experiences disappear, so does the importance of the gameplay. The main point of the gameplay is to be a container for the audio, visuals and narrative elements, and to support whatever those elements are trying to do at the moment. In this case, the gameplay is a container for the wonderful journey Hugo and Amicia go on as they explore the island. The point of this scene is to create a relaxing and peaceful atmosphere. The game does that by utilizing great visuals and audio. The gameplay is a walking simulator essentially, whose only purpose is to move the player from point A to B. And that is fine, you are on a journey after all, that's all you need to do in a gameplay. Most parts of the gameplay in Plague Tale Requiem is really a journey, a chain of scenery or emotions. The rat light puzzles can be thought of as a journey through a disgusting sea of rats and darkness. You move through that ocean of rats by utilizing a torch or some sort of light. When you have a torch, you're always safe. But the visuals and audio of the rats are always present on that journey. Gameplay can also produce emotions by itself though. When the light source has a timer, the gameplay can be a source of tension and fear. You can run out of light and die. That is, at the very least, the intention with the design here. The gameplay does not have that effect on me. The puzzles are far too easy and success is guaranteed if you understand what the developer wants you to do. When success is guaranteed, no tension or fear can be created, because there's no way I'm failing. And this is not badly designed at all. But it is designed for a different audience that does not need complex gameplay, and this is the important part. The design works if you're actually engaged with the gameplay. Stealth gameplay is better at evoking emotions in my opinion, because the option of failure is present. You can always mess up your timings or take the wrong path. The player has agency or the ability to make a lot of choices, and the player can make the wrong choice. When the player makes the wrong choice, they might get caught. Then you usually have the option to try and fight your way out of the encounter or run away. And that desperate fight when you get caught can add a lot of tension to the experience, and the flow of the game is not disrupted by having to reload and try the stealth section again. The game needs to hit that sweet spot of difficulty for this effect to work though. You need to get through a fair amount of stealth, but occasionally get caught. And if you find the game too hard or too easy, you won't experience this. But this is a pretty good use of a combat system in a stealth game to maintain tension and flow. The game includes a lot of sequences where it combines stealth, rats and the ability to use lethal force. If you use lethal force proactively, it can destroy most of the tension stealth provides. The threat of failure is what produces emotion during gameplay after all. And if the player perceives that they never fail, then the tension is not really there. Gameplay forces the player to be engaged in the visual, audio and narrative elements. They can't flip pages quickly as they read through a book or skip forward in a movie or a series. They have to be present when they engage with the gameplay. One of my favorite sequences in the game is when Amicia goes berserk in the barn. She's done running, she's done living in fear, she's so angry at the world, she decides to kill everyone instead of running away. The main drivers of this emotion in this scene is of course the narrative. Gameplay forces you to be present. You have to kill the enemies. Gameplay makes you feel more connected through the narrative, through action. You reinforce the narrative by doing an action the story is telling you about. The downside of forcing the player to be present during gameplay is that if the narrative, visuals and audio does not work, then the game becomes a slog and it's short to get through. It becomes boring. I hope this video manages to highlight how visuals, audio, narrative and gameplay are all responsible for creating emotions, in isolation or in conjunction. Ultimately speaking, emotionally driven games are artistic in nature. There is no real wrong or right way to combine these different elements, and there is no right or wrong objective way to manage the flow of the game either. If you get an emotional response out of the game, that is ultimately subjective. Emotionally driven games such as Plague Tale Requiem are some of the most hit-and-miss games out there, and if you don't get emotional responses out of the player, it can be really hard to see what people get out of the experience, because without that emotional response, these games offer nothing. I hope you got something out of this video. Leave some comments if you have some thoughts on the game or the video. I usually read everything even if I don't respond to it. Thank you for watching.